Okay, this sorry and go.
This week's parsha is the mitzvah Shmuezzen, which we're in the middle of actually doing. Shabbos. So, and we're connecting Pesach and Shavuos are connected through the sphere in a sense. From what I understand, it seems to be two ways in the Rishonim to explain the connection. What's the shaychus of Pesach and Shavuos? How to look at the connection in the sphere in between. The Sefer Chinuch says that when he talks about the shorish and the mitzvah Shmuezzen, he says the main thing is we're building up towards Matan Torah. He says, because of the Torah, the Eibusha created the world, and that's what we cannot. That's the whole reason of Yetzias Mitzrayim. He says the Iker and the Siba. Why did we come out of Mitzrayim? The Chinuch says, "Kedei shekabel HaTorah b'Sinai b'kaimua to mekabel the Torah to mekayim the Torah." So he says that that's why the Eibusha told Moshe Rabbeinu, "I'm going to take you out." When you come out of Mitzrayim, it'll be Tavis L'Kim Al Harazeh. It means it'll be Kabbalas HaTorah. The Eibusha told him right away in the beginning that the whole purpose of Yetzias Mitzrayim is to come to Kabbalas HaTorah. Kloimar she'tikabel HaTorah she'o Iker HaGodol she'b'svil zeh hem nigolim. And he says, Inyan Godol Hulhem, the Kabbalas HaTorah is bigger than the Cheres. Pashid, in Yetzias Mitzrayim, they got slavery, such a difficult slavery, Avdus and the freedom, and not avodim anymore. But the Ik is the Kabbalas HaTorah says. And he says, because of this, we start counting. He says the Indian of counting, when someone's looking forward to something, he counts. He counts. He can't wait for the days, so he's counting the days as they go on. He makes an interesting point about this. He says, why not count like we usually count down, like 10, 9, so, we get. So he says, it would sound like too long. We start with 50 or 50 days still. So you say one day, it's only one day, 2 days already, we're getting closer. Even as a kasha that maybe midstream we should change. Like when we get to halfway, we should start counting from the high numbers down. I guess when we get to 25, we should go 25, 24, 20 something. He says we don't want to switch in the middle. So he says, why don't we start counting from the first day of Pesach? So the Chinuch says, because one day Hashem left for the Nes HaGadol Yetzias Mitzrayim, because from there we learn Amunah, Eisum Leifis B'Chidush HaOlam. We learn about the Eibusha created the world, and Hashgachas Hashem, Hashgacha Pratis. So like Ein Ma'arav Simcha simply says, Ein La'arav Simchasei. So one day we leave for Pesach. The first day is about Yetzias Mitzrayim. And starting from the second day, we're looking forward to Kabbalas HaTorah. We start counting the Omer. And otherwise, he says we should have said Hayom Yom Rishon Misheni LePesach. Hayom Yom Misheni LePesach. We should count for the second day, but that doesn't sound right. So Hashem picked the Korban Omer. He said we're counting from the Omer, which is on the second day. But the main point that the Chinuch is stressing is that Yetzias Mitzrayim is essentially a build-up towards Kabbalas HaTorah. The Ik is Kabbalas HaTorah. There's a famous Ramban that L'chor is saying a little different mahalach. And there's the Ramban in also this week's parsha, where he talks about Shavuos Atzeres. So he says that just like Sukkot has one day and then there's 7 days and there's the Shmini Atzeres, so Pesach has also, instead of days, they have weeks. There's 7 weeks, and then there's Atzeres. But really, there's just like Sukkot, the beginning and the end are connected. So Pesach and Shavuos are connected. Instead of by days, by weeks. But Shavuos we call Atzeres, but it's like Shmini Atzeres. And the days in between, the weeks in between are like Chol HaMoed, Ramban says. So to me it sounds a little different than the Chinuch is saying. He's saying it's really essentially one Yontif with a Chol HaMoed in between. He doesn't stress the point about we're building up towards Matan Torah. He doesn't speak about that in the Kudah B'chlal. He says Chag HaMatzos Shivas Yom B'Kedusha Lefneim. There's 7 days of Kedusha before that. That's how it starts, and then there's at the end there's going to be There's going to be a Tisha of 7 weeks, he says. And that the seventh, then after that is going to be the Shmini Shel Chag. And the days in between that we count are like Chol HaMoed. And then he says, and that last day, Hu Yom Matan Torah, Shehira Mesa Esha Hagdoila Dvar Shom Mitocha Eish. That's what we call it Seres, because it's a connection. So I want to understand it this way. I hope I'm saying the right thing. That according to Ramban, it seems to me more that they're both in Yonam of Amunah. That there's a one big yontif about Amunah. Like, first of all, I want to explain it with like the Rambam, it's a famous Rambam, that the Rambam says, you say the HaTorah, that our whole Amunah, what do we base our whole Amunah on? What's the strongest point of our Amunah? So Ramban says, Matan Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu, le'aminu ba Yisrael mibnei ha'osa she'asa. The Amunah that we have in Moshe Rabbeinu is not from the older miracles that we had, he says. And he says, not to bring a raya and Amunah. He had to get rid of the Mitzrayim, so it was Kriyas Yamsuf. He needed the Muslims, who had the Mun. All these things were necessary. But he said, B'Maimin HaSinai. The Ikka Amunah is from Maimin HaSinai. Shenein Rov Le'Zor. We with our own eyes, we were there and we heard, we saw and we heard the Eish and the Koilos Lapidim. And we heard the Abisha speaking. She says, Panim Divrei Hashem Yimachim. Rambam is marach in this. That he says that the Ikka Amunah we have is from Matan Torah, not from Pesach. More from Matan Torah than from Pesach. So this is, it's like, I think the Ramban, in a sense of stressing, it's a yontiv of Amunah. That Matan Torah is when we were zoichet to have a clear, as Matan Torah, but we got the clearest Amunah, Gam b'chay yaminu b'loilam, was Matan Torah. That's why it's, according to I understand this way a little bit better to me, the way the Ramban puts the whole thing, that this is one yontiv with a Chol HaMoed in between. There's Pesach and the Shmuz, and there's a Chol HaMoed. What does it mean, one yontiv? It's a yontiv of Amunah. I don't have Chol HaTorah, but that's the connection that I think that he's focusing on. I once heard from the Mashgiach that's on the lake with Muslim. He had a kasha that we Shmuz and Matan Torah. That was the Luchas Rishonis. But those were broken, and we had the Luchas Shnias, was in Kippur. So why are we praving Matan Torah on now in Shmuz? We should have the main. So he said, because the Ikka is the Amunah. The Eibishter wants the Shmuz is the Ikka was the Maimin HaSinai. The Kabbalah Torah could be later, but the Maimin of Kabbalah Torah, that's what Hashem wants us to remember. How the Torah was given. And that was mainly by Shmuz. We saw all these things openly. The later wasn't. What?
That's what we say by Dayenu.
The what?
Where to Har Sinai,
I mean, even that, all these actions. Very good.
Very good.
Yeah. So I think that's. I'm not trying to take away from Matan Torah. I'm just trying to bring out that the Nakuda of Shmuz is this. It could be the same Nakuda as Pesach. It's all about Amunah, and that's what he's saying. It's a Chol HaMoed, and
He really thinks the first the real Matan Torah only happened with Moshe Rabbeinu. I mean, the second Luchas didn't happen in front of the whole Klai. So
yeah, right. So what I saw once, maybe I even once went over this here. There's a letter from Rabbi Chanan that he sent to America from after he went back to Europe. And I once saw afterwards, doesn't say here in the Kavos Mamorim itself, that this was the last letter that he sent. The last letter that Rabbi Chanan sent. So I want to go over a little bit this letter. It's more ridiculous letter that you can imagine Rabbi Chanan sent here to right before. It's what he like the
Who's the letter addressed to?
It's the Yisrael. I think Yisrael HaTorah sounds like young Israel. Michtav Shnishvach Yisrael HaTorah in quotation marks. Yisrael HaTorah sounds young Israel. Yeah. That was those days. It was in New York. in Tov Reish Tzadik Tes, 1939, in the summer of 1939. That's Mamish. The war broke out in September 39. So it's the summer, it's 2 weeks Mamish, the last Erev the Muhammad. So he starts off with the Gemara that Gemara says, which we learned in this Yeshiva not long ago in Sanhedrin. I mean, how do you know that if you see someone drowning or someone's being attacked by listim, there's a chiyuv, if you're able to try to save him? Because it says, like, Samal Dam Reacha. So he says, that's if you see one single yid drowning. So Rabbi Chana says, Kol Shkein, if there's many yidden in Sakana, and Kal V'chaim, if God's Klal Yisrael is in danger, is drowning, he says. Kamei b'yameina, like he says, it's happening. So Kama G'dayla HaChoiva, on each person to be mishtadl, to save them. But, he says, Bashkafa Rishayna, well, it's not Lamaisa. How are you supposed to save Klal Yisrael? He said. But he says that if we think into the Torah, we'll see that there is a way, he says. Then he continues, he says that a doctor, when someone comes to him, he looks for the source of the disease. He looks to try to figure out why is this happening here. Right? That's the koyach of a good doctor. And he says if he's matzliach to take away the cause, then the machal goes away. So he says, therefore, we have to look. If we want to help Klal Yisrael, we have to search and look. Why did this happen? He says, why in such a short time did such tremendous tzaros happen? His lashon has been made in a measure. Shlahaya kamayim yemais hachurban. That's it. So he says that most, because a raiv of Klal Yisrael, he says, is circled and in danger. He says like this: if you try to figure this out with your own seichel, you'll never get it. He says, because everything that happened to us is not kederach hateva. I'll give you one small example. He says, the Melech Kosher Kahaman that they were facing then, he came from Ashbois. He came from Mamish, from being nobody, in a short time, that he's the strongest person and the whole world's trembling from him. So he says, that's a Shloi Kederach HaTeva. So he says, so the only way to figure this out is to look in the Torah. Logically, there's no way to explain what happened, he said. So he says that we know another rule, he says that the Torah only tells us nevuah that's needed for Doros to come. Nevuah that happened that wasn't important for future generations was not written in the Torah. So he says, so therefore whatever we have in our Torah, we know is nitzchi, it's forever, and it's nishar for all the zmanim. So now this is Akdama. Then he says, so now let's figure it out. So he says, Tziv Hashem li'Yaakov svivav tzarav. That he says the reason that Hashem brings tzaras and Klal Yisrael is that we shouldn't forget that we're Yidden, he said. That's basically it, he says. The tzarim that surround us in all places and all times remind us of this. The level of tsar depends on how much a wake-up we need, he said. Like a person is sleeping in a house that's on fire, and you have to wake him up. So if he's only in a light sleep, you just wake him up a little bit. If he's sleeping in a deep sleep, you might have to take a needle, he says, to wake him up with a machat. And if there's no other way. So he says, if we would remember on our own, by Yiddishkeit, he says, we wouldn't need any strong reminders. But he said, if we forgot the bris that Hashem created with us, and we want to be like all the nations, then he says Hashem sends wild animals like we see now. He says, he says in this pasuk he says, like a shaygig and le'avu they didn't want is amazing. He says that we have that nowadays. He says a big chelik Klal Yisrael are shaygigim. They were misled by people who misled Yidden, that pulled Yidden away from Yiddishkeit. And he says those are the people who made schools that teach kfira and teach children from their childhood. And he says that is reason, that is why everything happened, he said. the fact that Yidden, many Yidden, he says, were lost to Yiddishkeit, says, Zuhi asibu hamitis shall call habo aleinu beis hazois. He says. But then he asks, well, not enough, he says. How did this happen? He says, Eich miyek davar zeh, asher Yisrael shall mi'oz me'olam aminim b'nei aminim. And now the Amunah is lost from a big chelik of Klal Yisrael. So he says, the answer to this is also in the Torah. He says, the pasuk says, V'sartem v'avadetem. Shmuez says, the Rashi brings, Kivim shesar odem min ha-Torah, ve'ad-hoylech u'mizdavik b'avodah zarah. Because the Yetzer Lev Adam Ram in Urav, he speaks out, and the Yetzer Hara is very strong. The only Eitz is Brasi Yetzer Hara, Brasi Torah Tavlin. If we don't keep by the Torah, Limit HaTorah, the Amunah gets weaker. He says, Kivim shesar odem min ha-Torah, Hamuna harleches u'misrei pefes etzlei ashel v'sayv nasa koyfe gomer. So he says, and he brings another Rashi that goes to 7 madregas. It goes down from not being all batayras avaita. He says, he quotes the Chavetz Chaim. Chavetz Chaim said in Yiddish, he says, Geit hareis Torah b'zayis gain Amunah b'Hashem. If Torah goes out, Amunah goes out. And then without Amunah, he says, the world doesn't have a kiyum. So he brings, so he says, and he speaks about this, he says that Habakkuk said, Sarik b'emnusa yichya, that you need Amunah, and he says it's impossible to have Amunah without limit HaTorah. That's what he's stressing here. V'nimtza, so then after all this, that's Elchanan concludes, Ki sibas hasibas, if you go deeper and deeper, why all the tzara is happening? L'matzavenu hanechochi, yema Hashem al ozum es terasi, he says. So therefore, now that he's the doctor and he diagnosed Reb Elchanan why all this happened, so then he says there's an eitzah. Im kein ach bonu tshosenu, we have an eitzah, hein lishtadol lahofetz Torah b'Yisrael. We have to try to spread Torah in Klal Yisrael. And he says, Messiah, anyone who helps spreading Torah is saving Klal Yisrael. One who stands from a distance, he says, is oivel isam el dam re'echa. Then he says, and how do you build Torah? So the first thing is to start with Chadorim, to teach Chumash Rashi, which brings together Torah Shebiksav with Torah Shebal Peh. That's what Rashi does. And it's important to have Melamdim that have Yiras Shamayim, that he says, not to have someone who knows Hebrew, and but he's not an Erlich Yid, then it's just as good as giving him over to Shmad, he says. So this is what Rebbe Elchanan says. This is what Rebbe Elchanan was teaching, that this letter, he's begging people to strengthen Torah. Their own limit Torah speaks about and spreading Torah for others, says. And that's the answer to the tzara that he was talking about at that time. But what we see from here is talking about the kasher between Pesach and Shvuos, that going on with the Ramban that says that it's like one yontif with a cholamoid in between. So the Torah, Kabbalah of Torah, is the Eitzah for Amunah. So saying besides the Maimin Har Sinai, that Maimin Har Sinai brings Amunah. That's like the Rambam wrote. That because how the Torah was given, and we saw with our own eyes, and we heard with our own ears, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was speaking. So that strengthens our Amunah. What happened then strengthens Amunah. But the Torah was given. The Torah itself is the only way to strengthen Amunah. So that itself connects with Pesach. Pesach is where we start to have Amunah with all the Nisan, Yeshivas, Mitzrayim. But the Shmuz connects it through the Torah, but with the focus on Amunah, because Torah brings to Amunah. And so that's how it connects. The two things connect to be one, strengthening of Amunah Hashem. There's a Rambam also in the beginning of Hilchos Krishma, says something also similar to this. Just a few words. In Hilchos Krishma, first parak, he says, And right away in the beginning, it says, Pamayim b'chol yoyim, it's the first halacha. Twice a day we say Krishma, but in the morning and in the evening. It says Shavu Kumecha. Then the second halacha says Umahu Kairei. What is Krishma? What do we say? Shleisha Parshiyas Elu Hem Shema V'Hem Shmoyen V'Yoyma. And the first parsha he says is Shema, and V'Yohavta goes together. Makdimin Likreis Parsha Shema. Why? Why is that the first parsha that we learn? V'Mnei Sheyesh Bo Yichud Hashem. We speak about Hashem Echad, V'Ahavosai, V'Ahavta Hashem L'Kecha. This is V'Talmudai, because it has the pasuk V'Shinamtum L'Vanecha. So it has Yichud Hashem, Avosai, V'Talmudai, Shehu Ha'ikar HaGodol Shakol Toli Boy. It seems to focusing, he says that Talmudai is the Ikar HaGodol, that everything, I think he's referring to all three, would have said, they are the Ikrim HaGodol, He says, it has in it the Yichud Hashem, Avos Hashem, and Limud HaTorah, Shu Ikar HaGodol Shakol Toli Boy. So everything's totally in Talmud Torah. He says, Avos Hashem, Yiras Hashem, Yichud Hashem. Talmud Torah is what holds us, like Rabbi Chanan said, that Brasi Yetzirah, Brasi Torah Tavlin, that the Torah is what is our weapon, our koyach against the Yetzirah and every all these Seidus of Amunah. So this is the inyan that we're getting closer to Shmuz, Matan Torah, and this whole tkufa that we're in is according to the obviously the inyan of a chizuk, a tremendous chizuk in Kabbalah Torah, but in Amunah B'Hashem, that to strengthen our Amunah. And this is at the same time what Rabbi Chanan spoke about, being mechazik habotzas Torah. If there's any way, either now in the present or in our lives in the future, a person has an opportunity to somehow strengthen Torah in this community, a different community, where they need a chadorim, or they need make a shiur. Anything a person does for Kabbalah, for Talmud Torah, Rabbi Chanan says that's HaTorah for Klal Yisrael. You're working for HaTorah. You're saving Klal Yisrael because but Torah is what saves Klal Yisrael. And without Torah, then we need reminders. The Muni gets shvacha, and then we need the Goyim to remind us that we're Yidden. But if we learn Torah, that's our protection. That's our belief that we have. I guess that's what carried over to Eretz Yisrael, that the Bacham will learn Torah, and Eretz Yisrael they learn about Torah. If they want to take people away from Torah, we're hurting ourselves by taking people away from Torah to go fight. The Torah is our strength. The Torah is our strength. Those are, if you're a Maimon, if you're not a Maimon, doesn't make sense to you. But if someone is a Maimon, what the Torah teaches us, Rabbi Chanan explains that everything, our whole protection, even in the worst times, Rabbi Chanan is begging for help. He says, please learn Torah. Please teach children Torah. He'll save me from the world war. So that's we need it. Such an yonim is what we have to strengthen our own emunah, that we should believe this, that we're supposed to believe it, that the Torah is what the Torah is, and the Torah does for us and for Klal Yisrael. When we learn Torah here, we're helping Klal Yisrael, we're helping Eretz Yisrael, we're helping. That's Shmuezzen to Kabbalah Torah and to Zecher to Yeshiva's Christ.
So she related the political question?
Yes.
Let me know. You guys?